Hotel Transylvania 2. Full movie explained. The story of Hotel Transylvania 2 takes place several years after the events of the first movie. Dracula, the famous vampire and owner of Hotel Transylvania, has changed a lot. In the past, he was extremely protective of his daughter Mavis and believed that humans were dangerous. However, everything changed when Mavis fell in love with a human named Jonathan. At first, Dracula could not accept Jonathan because he was afraid that a human would hurt his daughter. But eventually, Dracula realized that Jonathan genuinely loved Mavis. The two got married, bringing humans and monsters together in a way that Dracula never thought possible. After their wedding, Mavis and Jonathan continue living at Hotel Transylvania. The hotel is now a much happier place because monsters and humans are beginning to accept each other. Soon, Mavis discovers that she and Jonathan are going to have a baby. Dracula is extremely excited when he hears the news. He has always been protective of Mavis, and now he is going to become a grandfather. Dracula immediately starts imagining what his grandson will be like. Because Mavis is a vampire and Jonathan is human, Dracula wonders whether the baby will become a vampire, a human, or something in between. Eventually, Mavis gives birth to a baby boy. Mavis and Jonathan name him Dennis. Dracula becomes completely obsessed with his grandson. He loves Dennis more than anything and wants him to grow up as a vampire. Dracula imagines Dennis having vampire powers, flying through the sky, transforming into a bat, and becoming a powerful member of the monster family. However, there is one problem. Dennis does not seem to have any vampire powers. As Dennis grows older, Dracula watches him carefully. He expects Dennis to develop vampire abilities, but Dennis looks and behaves mostly like a normal human child. Dracula becomes increasingly worried. He starts wondering whether Dennis is actually a vampire. Since Jonathan is human, Dracula fears that Dennis might have inherited only his human side. Mavis, however, does not care whether Dennis becomes a vampire or a human. She loves her son exactly as he is. Jonathan feels the same way. Dracula struggles to understand this because he has spent his entire life believing that being a vampire is an important part of his family's identity. As Dennis approaches his 5th birthday, Dracula becomes even more determined to discover whether his grandson has vampire powers. He believes that Dennis's powers should appear by the time he is 5. Meanwhile, Mavis begins thinking about the environment in which Dennis is growing up. Although she loves Hotel Transylvania, she starts wondering if the hotel is the right place for Dennis. She thinks about Jonathan's hometown in California and believes Dennis could have a more normal childhood there. Mavis also realizes that Dennis is surrounded by monsters all the time. She worries that people might treat him differently if they discover that he is connected to a family of monsters. She begins considering moving to California with Jonathan and Dennis. When Dracula hears about Mavis's plan, he becomes worried. He does not want his daughter and grandson to leave the hotel. Dracula starts thinking of ways to convince Mavis that Hotel Transylvania is the best place for Dennis. At the same time, Dracula wants to prove that Dennis is a vampire. He decides that Dennis needs some special training. Dracula secretly asks his closest monster friends for help. Frankenstein, Murray the Mummy, Wayne the Werewolf, and Griffin the Invisible Man agree to help him. The group comes up with different ideas for bringing out Dennis's hidden vampire abilities. Dracula believes that Dennis might simply need to experience something frightening or exciting. The monsters take Dennis on different adventures and try to teach him how to behave like a monster. However, Dennis remains innocent and playful. He does not suddenly become a powerful vampire. Dracula becomes frustrated, but he refuses to give up. One of the biggest problems is that Dracula is not being completely honest with Mavis. He is secretly trying to change Dennis because he is afraid of losing his family. Eventually, Dracula takes Dennis to a dangerous location with his monster friends. He hopes that putting Dennis into a frightening situation will activate his vampire powers. But the plan does not go as expected. Dennis becomes frightened instead of becoming powerful. Mavis eventually discovers what Dracula has been doing. She becomes upset because she believes Dracula is putting too much pressure on Dennis. Mavis explains that Dennis should not have to prove that he is a vampire. She wants Dennis to grow up without feeling that something is wrong with him. Dracula begins to realize that his fear has caused him to make bad decisions. However, before the family can completely solve their problems, an important event is approaching. Dennis's 5th birthday is about to take place. The entire monster family gathers together for the celebration. But there is another surprise. Dracula's father, Vlad, arrives. Vlad is an ancient and extremely powerful vampire. Unlike Dracula, he has never accepted humans easily. He represents an older generation of vampires who believe that monsters should stay away from humans. When Vlad discovers that Dracula's daughter married a human and that his grandson is half human, he is shocked. Vlad does not understand why Dracula has allowed a human to become part of their family. Jonathan tries to remain friendly, but Vlad is suspicious of him. The tension grows as Vlad learns more about Dennis. Vlad expects Dennis to behave like a vampire, but Dennis still does not show obvious powers. Dracula is disappointed. He begins to think that Dennis may never become a vampire. For Dracula, this feels like a personal failure because he has spent so much time trying to protect the vampire family tradition. Mavis, however, continues to support her son. She tells Dracula that Dennis does not need to become a vampire to make the family proud. The birthday celebration continues, but the situation becomes increasingly complicated because Vlad's presence creates tension between the monsters and humans. Vlad eventually realizes that Dennis has been raised around humans as well as monsters. Instead of seeing this as something positive, he views it as a threat to their traditions. Dracula finally starts understanding that his father's old-fashioned beliefs are part of the reason he has been so afraid of change. For years, Dracula believed that being a monster meant keeping humans away. But Mavis and Jonathan's relationship proved that monsters and humans could live together. Dennis is the perfect example of that new generation. He is both human and monster, and there is nothing wrong with that. As the birthday celebration reaches its most important moment, Dennis still appears to have no vampire powers. Dracula becomes emotional because he believes his grandson might be completely human. But then something unexpected happens. Dennis's appearance begins to change. His hair suddenly grows in a way that reveals his vampire side. Dracula realizes that Dennis's powers were simply developing later than he expected. The family is surprised and excited. Dracula is especially happy because he finally realizes that Dennis does have vampire abilities. But the most important discovery is not Dennis's powers. It is the realization that Dennis never needed to be forced into becoming anything. His abilities appeared naturally when he was ready. The situation with Vlad also becomes more serious. Vlad has his own ideas about what Dennis should become, but Dracula now understands that Dennis deserves the freedom to choose his own identity. The monsters and humans eventually work together to protect Dennis and the family. This is one of the biggest changes from the beginning of the story. At the start, Dracula was afraid of humans. Now he is standing beside humans to protect his grandson. Jonathan also proves that he is not simply a human living among monsters. He is an important part of the family. Mavis realizes that she does not need to choose between her monster heritage and Jonathan's human world. Dennis can grow up with both sides of his family. The final conflict teaches Dracula an important lesson. He had been trying so hard to protect Dennis that he forgot to listen to him. He had also been afraid that Mavis would leave him, so he tried to control the situation. But love is not about controlling someone. Love means trusting them. Dracula finally accepts that Dennis can be whatever he wants to become. He can be a vampire. He can be human. He can be both. Most importantly, he can simply be Dennis. After everything is resolved, the family celebrates together. The hotel becomes a symbol of the new relationship between monsters and humans. Instead of being a secret place where monsters hide from people, Hotel Transylvania has become a place where different kinds of people can come together. Dracula is no longer the same fearful father he was at the beginning of the story. He has learned to accept change. Mavis is also happier because she realizes that she does not have to leave her family behind. Jonathan continues being part of the monster family, and Dennis grows up surrounded by people who love him. The ending shows that the old differences between humans and monsters are slowly disappearing. The next generation does not have to repeat the fears and prejudices of the past. Dennis represents a new future where humans and monsters can live together. Dracula's journey is especially important because he begins the movie believing that he knows what is best for his family. He thinks Dennis must become a vampire. He thinks Mavis should stay at the hotel. He thinks humans are dangerous. But by the end, he learns that his family members have their own choices and identities. He does not have to control them to keep them safe. The most important thing is that they stay together because they want to, not because Dracula forces them to. Moral of Hotel Transylvania 2. The main moral of Hotel Transylvania 2 is that we should accept people for who they are instead of forcing them to become what we expect them to be. Dennis does not need to prove that he is a vampire. His family should love him whether he has supernatural powers or not. The movie also teaches us that differences do not have to separate people. Humans and monsters may come from completely different worlds, but they can still become friends and family.